It was an odd thing to enter into my calendar. I had the date and the time as well as a Zoom link, but I hesitated trying to figure out what exactly to call this particular appointment. I eventually typed end of life planning with Becky. And then a few weeks ago, there it was in my schedule, tucked in between other meetings, a time to sit with Bob and our friend Becky to review our final wishes. This wasn't the first time we had had such a chat. We discussed all of these things several years ago when we prepared our wills and named each other as our medical power of attorney. But as the COVID-19 pandemic began to unfold and it started to become clear that men were at a greater risk of poor outcomes, and our being a couple of middle-aged men, it felt prudent to revisit our conversation with Becky about what mattered most to each of us when it came to decisions about how we would want and would not want to die. And so we talked about ventilators and the potential for long-term organ damage. We talked about what quality of life really means to us both. We talked about pain management and sedation and our hope to be able to say goodbye should the end come sooner than expected. Statistically, our risk of death in this pandemic is quite low, but it does exist. And so we heeded the pleas that have come from doctors on the front lines to get our affairs in order. Specifically with COVID, medical teams have most needed to know if patients wish to be intubated and put on a ventilator. While the impulse is often to take whatever measures are necessary to save and prolong life, the decision can be more complicated than it would seem. As a doctor put in an article in the Star just yesterday, these are horrible decisions to be making, often with loved ones over the phone in the space of a very few critical and chaotic minutes. So my first charge to you this morning is to spend time in the coming days putting your medical affairs in order. Reflect on what matters most to you. If you feel you need to know more, do some research. I'll post links along with the sermon later today on our website to help you. But most importantly, have brave conversations with the loved ones in your life who may be called upon to speak for you if you cannot speak for yourself. One of the kindest things you can ever do for those who may be asked to care for you is to ensure that they are not left to wonder about your wishes. When I worked as a chaplain in a trauma hospital in Boston as part of my training for ministry, I would come home from my overnight shifts and emerge to present Bob with a new list of things that I did or did not want to have done to me should I ever be in critical condition myself. That experience left me with mixed feelings about heroic measures. Though they can sometimes make all the difference, they can also be incredibly invasive. Which is why it is so important that your beloveds fully understand what quality of life means to you. I know these may not be the easiest conversations to have. It can be deeply uncomfortable to reflect on the decisions that may surround our death and our dying. It is okay, if it helps to get through it, to keep it all pretty abstract and make it an intellectual exercise. But I do promise you that there is life and life more abundant to be found by going deeper into all of this. One day, for us all, the abstract will become reality. It's been said that life is a sexually transmitted condition with a terminal prognosis. That our lives will end is the hardest fact of life. Forrest Church, the UU minister, often said that religion itself is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. It is our way of making sense of life's fragility, even as we fill our lungs with the breath of life. In our tradition, we often say during memorial services that a life is sacred in its being born, in its living, and in its dying. I have witnessed enough deaths to know that that is true. Much about how our final moments play out may be beyond our control in the end, given the many ways in which we humans die. But more often than not, our wishes can be honored to the end if they are known. I hope those of you who took my course, Living for a Good Death, several years ago, remember the takeaway that good deaths don't happen by accident. They require intention, planning, and heartfelt conversations with our loved ones, as well as a bit of luck. Dr. Atul Gawande, the medical doctor who wrote a powerful book on death and dying called Being Mortal, through the course of his research, discovered that there are 4 important questions to be asked of a person nearing the end. What do they understand about the condition of their health? What goals do they have if their health worsens? What are they feeling afraid of? And finally, what trade-offs are they willing to make and not willing to make? These can be powerful questions to ask because the answers can transform the time that a person has left, because it becomes then clear to all around them what that person's highest priorities are. These questions can and should be revisited often as the answers can and do change. But when the loved ones and the medical team around a person dying has these conversations, everyone can work together to respect their priorities to the end. Now, most of what I've said thus far concerns the physical aspects of our dying, the logistical details of life's end. Having clarity about all of this is incredibly important to dying well. But there is often emotional and spiritual work to be done in order to truly put our affairs in order. Often people reach the end with some part of this work left undone, and while living out their final days, find themselves contending with regret and hurt over things left unsaid. Such distress is never helpful at life's end. While a medical team can help a patient manage pain, they cannot relieve the suffering of the work we have left undone. Part of living with the hope of having a good death is ensuring that when you do come to die, all that you have left to do is to die. Dr. Ira Barak, whose work across several decades has focused on the process of dying, speaks of the 4 things, the 4 statements we need to have said to our nearest and dearest before we die. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. These 4 statements, both simple and possibly not so simple, all at the same time, come from Bayak's observations of people reaching the end with their work left undone. So my second charge to you this morning, dearly beloved, is to take up the deeper work of getting your affairs in order, to engage with the soul work that may be required for you to be able to forgive and be forgiven, to live from a place of deep gratitude and with a heart full of love. There is no time like the present to get going. As a certain song from the 50s put it, it is later than you think. Or in the immortal words of Dr. Seuss, how did it get so late so soon? It's night before it's afternoon. December is here before it's June. My goodness, how the time has flown. How did it get so late so soon? We humans are prone to thinking we actually have more time than we do. More time to do the work of healing our relationships where they hurt and saying every last loving thing that should be said if our beloveds are to truly know what they mean to us. Preparing for life's end involves living deeply into what is left of our lives, be it weeks or months, years or decades. We need not wait until the end is nigh to get our proverbial house in order. The work is the work of life itself. Atul Gawande, the doctor who came up with the 4 questions to ask a patient near the end of life, tells the story about how these questions played into the life of his daughter's piano teacher, Peg. Gawande had learned from her husband that Peg was in hospital. She had been treated 2 years before for a rare pelvic cancer requiring chemotherapy, radiation, and radical surgery. She returned to teaching and refilled her student roster in no time. She was in her early 60s, tall, with a lovely, gentle way. But she had now developed a leukemia-like malignancy caused by her earlier treatment. She went back on chemotherapy and somehow kept teaching. But then for 2 straight weeks, she canceled all of her lessons. And that's when Gawande got the call from her husband that she was in hospital and learned that her treatment was not working. She didn't know what to do, and neither did her doctors. She felt utterly hopeless. Her condition was incurable by all known means. So Gawande asked Peg the 4 questions. She said flat out that she knew that she was going to die. He asked her about her goals, and she said that she didn't have any that she saw being possible anymore. And then he asked about her fears, what her fears for the future were, and she named a litany: facing more pain, suffering the humiliation of losing more of her bodily control, being unable to leave the hospital. She choked up as she spoke. She had been there for days, just getting worse, and she feared she didn't have many more. Hearing her fears, he suggested that Peg try hospice. It would at least get her home and might help her more than she knew. Hospice's aim, at least in theory, is to give people their best possible day, however they might define it under the circumstances. And it had been a while since she had had a good day. With her husband's encouragement, she went home for hospice less than 48 hours later. Gwandi broke the news to his daughter Hunter, then just 13 years old, that Peg could not teach her anymore and that she was dying. Hunter asked if she could see Peg one more time, but Gwandi said he didn't think so. A few days later, though, they got a surprising call from Peg. She wanted to resume teaching. She said she would understand if Hunter didn't want to come. She didn't know how many more lessons she could manage, but she wanted to try. That hospice could make teaching possible for her again was more than any of them had imagined. But when her hospice nurse arrived on the first day, she asked Peg what she cared most about in her life, what having the best day possible meant to her. And then they worked together to make it happen. Her husband Martin said she came to a clear view of how she wanted to live the rest of her days. She was going to be home, and she was going to teach. It took a lot of planning and great expertise to make each lesson possible. Peg had no children. Her students filled that place in her life. And she still had some things she wanted them to know before she went. Peg got to fulfill her final wish. She lived another 6 weeks after going into hospice. Hunter had lessons for 4 of those weeks, and 2 final concerts were played. One featured Peg's current students, all younger children. The other, her former students from around the country. Gathered in her living room, they played Brahms and Chopin and Beethoven for their adored teacher. A week later, Peg fell into delirium, and a short time after that died peacefully in her bed. Gwandi's final memory of Peg is from the end of her last recital with the children. She had taken each student away from the crowd to give them a personal gift and say to them a few words. When it was Hunter's turn, Peg gave her a book of music. Then she put her arm around her and whispered, "You are special." It was something she never wanted her students to forget. Friends, how we approach the work of our life, the work of our hands and our hearts, will in the end be our magnum opus, our life's great work. Let us then this day renew our commitment to truly putting our affairs in order, to truly doing our soul work, that we may live with each moment we are given into the fullness of our best possible day. Blessed be.